Get in there and stay there, you little slut! The stepfather screamed at his Pegasus daughter as he dragged her by the ear and flung her violently on her bed. You will not get any dinner or dessert tonight! After that, he slammed the door so hard, it was almost as if it rattled the entire apartment. The Pegasus mare buried her face into her pillow and let fresh tears flow down her cheeks. All of these beatings and punishment, all because she accidentally dropped a bowl and it shattered into smithereens. She saw her stepfather's face become incandescent with fury. Then he yelled at her how she couldn't do anything right and how life would have been better if he never knew her. Then he began to violently assault her so hard that she could hardly move her legs. She longed for her mother to come back and comfort her from this monster of a stepfather, but she knew she would never see her again because she was gone forever. Before her stepfather came into her life, she lived a really happy life with her family. She had a good education, great friends, and loved riding around on her scooter. But the only thing that stopped her in her tracks was the fact that she couldn't fly. Her wings were small, unlike some of the Pegasi in her school, and she felt embarrassed about it. She had many dreams of drifting the skies like her idol, Rainbow Dash. But that didn't stop her. She had the greatest friends in all of Equestria. She and her best friends were in a faction that was dedicated to foals getting their cutie marks. For years, they tried everything they could to earn their marks, to find their special talent, but never succeeded. That is, until one day, they helped a former bully stand up to her snobby mother and take a stand for herself. To their immense surprise and glee, the three of them all got their cutie marks at the same time, the first time that had ever happened in Equestria. However, things started to go downhill from there. Weeks before her 11th birthday, her mother divorced her father after he was caught with another mare in their bed. Angry and heartbroken, her mother fell into a deep state of depression, but she knew she still had her sweet little daughter. The Pegasus would console her mother warmly, like how her mother would comfort her whenever she was sad, scared, or angry. Next to her best friends, her mother to her was a relationship as close as bread and butter. Not long after, her mother met another Pegasus, and the two immediately fell head over heels for each other. When she introduced him to her daughter, she didn't like him at first. But when she got to know him more, she started to grow fond of his friendly and caring demeanor. Her mother and the stallion instantly began dating. They dated until the filly grew into her teenage stage. When she just turned 14, the stallion proposed to her mother, and with tears of joy, her mother accepted. Months later, they were married. The daughter now had a stepfather whom would comfort her and be there for her when she was lonely. This was the beginning of something new, she thought, and things went well for her. That is until she heard the news that her stepfather had applied for a job in Manehattan. That meant they were moving, in which she didn't want to. She didn't want to leave her best friends behind and her idol, but her mother said that it wasn't the last time she would see them, for she could come back and visit them sometimes. Still, she was devastated that she had to go. She remembered saying goodbye to her friends in a long, tearful embrace before she got on the train to Manehattan. Then, she gave Rainbow Dash the biggest hug she had ever given. Rainbow Dash wasn't just her idol. She was her little sister, as Rainbow Dash called her. She would never forget the great times and adventures she had in Ponyville with all of her friends. She remembered the first time she met them. It was in Sugar Cube Corner. She and her other friend hid under a table, listening to two of their former bullies, whom was now their friend, tease a yellow filly with a big pink bow etched on top of her red mane. They had heard enough. She and the other pony came out from under the table and stood up to the two snobby fillies, revealing to the red-maned filly that they didn't have cutie marks just like her. She remembered the three trying to come up with a name for their faction. Then they found the perfect name. The name that stuck out as a gem in her childhood memories. The Cutie Mark Crusaders. To remember them and all the great adventures they had finding their talents, she brought her cape that her friend had made. The cape was made of red Kona cotton with a silky, smooth, crepe-backed satin underside. On it was a blue shield made of fleece with a yellow filly and a cape outline etched in the middle. It was a symbol that no matter how far away they were from each other, their friendship was still glued together in one strong piece. A piece that would never break. A piece that would forever fulfill a never-ending bond. When she stepped on the train, she wrapped the cape around her, looked back at them, and gave them all one last wave before disappearing into the cart and finally leaving for Manehattan. She stared at the window, visioning her memories she had with her friends, family, and other townsfolk in Ponyville. A single tear dripped down her cheek and fell onto her lap. Once they first got to Manehattan, she didn't feel comfortable with the idea of living in an apartment. It wasn't like most homes back in Ponyville. This time, she would be living in a place where strangers lived in other rooms that were just across her wall. That meant she couldn't play her rock and roll music or pretend to be a Wonderbolt as she dreamed. She was also going to a new school, a place where she wouldn't recognize any pony or teacher. She just knew she wasn't going to fit in. Once they stepped into the apartment, she noticed that most of their things from their old home were already in place. Some things still packed in boxes and still needed to be unpacked. A flight of stairs led up to a long, dark hallway. Probably to the bedrooms, she decided. She felt a hoof on her shoulder, and she turned around. Her mother stood there, a warming smile on her face. "Honey, do you think you could do a favor for me and your father, please?" she asked. "Huh? Oh, sure," the daughter replied. "Anything for you, Mom." "Do you think you can run an errand for us?" her mother asked. "Yes, Mom," her daughter said, her voice showing slight impatience. She didn't like waiting. For her, waiting was absolute hell. No matter how much she hated doing it, she didn't like showing it towards her mother. She loved her mother and didn't want to disappoint her, for she was the one she looked up to her entire life. "You know that grocery store that's around the block?" her mother asked. The daughter nodded. "Yeah," she said with uncertainty. "Well, I want you to go there and get some items so we can have dinner tonight," her mother said. Her daughter groaned. If there was one thing she hated more than waiting, it was shopping. But her annoyance left her when she saw her mother's smile fade and turn into a look of slight annoyance. "Young lady," Mother said, "it wouldn't kill you to go down the block and get some items for us. Besides, it's a beautiful day. Why aren't you outside enjoying it?" Uh-oh, her daughter thought. There was that tone of voice in which her mother said something. She meant it. The teenager sighed and looked at a nearby window. Bright sunlight streamed in through the glass panes. "It does look nice outside today," the teenager thought. "I guess a little exercise wouldn't hurt. After all, that will give me more time to practice some new moves on my scooter." Seeing there was no way else to argue with her mother, she let out a sigh and smiled. "Okay, Mom, what do you need me to get?" she asked. Her mother pulled out a small strand of paper from her saddlebag and handed it to her. "Everything we need is on that paper," she said. "I wrote it down before we left Ponyville." Her daughter looked at the list she held in her hoof as she read over the items her mother wanted her to get. Bread, tomatoes, lettuce, milk, cheese, cereal, any kind you want. "Oh, I almost forgot, Mother said. She reached into her bag and pulled out 10 golden coins. Here are the bits you'll need so you can pay for the groceries. She placed them in her daughter's hoof. Then the teenager opened her saddlebag and tossed them inside. After that, she opened a box and pulled out her helmet, which was colored purple with a white line running down the middle from the front and back. She then pulled out her scooter that was in another box and a small red wagon. She latched it on her scooter and made her way to the door. Right when she put her hoof on the knob and was about to turn it, her mother interrupted her. Be careful, honey. There's a lot of gangs around these areas, and they don't take very kindly to a lot of ponies. The daughter rolled her eyes and giggled a bit. Mom, I'm 15. I can handle myself just fine. I know, her mother replied. I'm just worried about your safety because I love you so much and would rather be dead than let any crooks or gangsters hurt you, or even worse, murder you. I won't let any crook try to mess with me because I'm a tough pony, her daughter said, puffing out her chest in pride. Her mother chuckled. Well, I'm just giving you a warning, she said. I just don't want anything bad happening to you. Now, come here and give me a hug. The teenager trotted over to her mother and embraced her. It felt warm, the way she liked it. Her mother was like a guardian angel to her best friend, her favorite pony in all of Equestria, next to Rainbow Dash and her Crusader friends back in Ponyville. They let go of each other as her mother told her, Don't stay out late. Be back near sunset. She then planted a small kiss on her daughter's forehead. Yes, ma'am, she replied to her mother. She made her way to the door, turned the knob, and stepped outside. She felt the warm air brush across her face as she took a deep breath, letting in the fresh air, then exhaled a refreshed breath. It was a beautiful afternoon, but then her thoughts were interrupted as she remembered what her mother had said if she encountered any gangs. She'd rather be dead? Those words flew all around her mind like a wonderbolt zooming across the sky at a lightning-fast speed. What does she mean by that? She asked herself in her mind as she started her way down the sidewalk on her scooter. Little did she know that days later, she would find out soon enough. That night, they had a good dinner. Luckily, she didn't run into any gangs or crooks around the city. Then it was time to go to bed. She went into the bathroom, brushed her teeth, and went to her new bedroom. It was a bit empty, but her bed was there, and she would have time tomorrow to put her things wherever she wanted. But first, she had to go to school, so she would have to wait until she got home. When she first stepped hoof onto the property of her new school the next morning, she noticed it wasn't the small schoolhouse she used to go to in Ponyville. This school was much larger, more immense. There were a lot of ponies she didn't know, but she decided to calm down and give it a chance. She couldn't turn around and just run back home like a scared dog. When she stepped into her classroom, some ponies stared at her with confusion. Some were turned and talking to their classmates, not noticing that she had just walked in. But when she introduced herself to them, they were nice and friendly to her. They liked her tomboyish attitude and her athleticism. All of them, except for one. He was the meanest, nastiest student in the school, and he did not like her at all. She was already used to it because she had been bullied at school numerous times back in Ponyville when she was a filly. But this bully was much worse. The worst thing about it was that he sat right behind her. Over the course of days, he did everything he could to make her miserable. One time when she was walking down the hallway, he tripped her and she fell, dropping her saddlebags that were filled with her school supplies. Books, Papers, journals, and pencils were scattered everywhere. Some ponies laughed, others helped her. Another time, he wadded up a spitball, stuck it in a straw, and when the teacher wasn't looking, he spat the wet glob on the back of her neck. He would also pull her mane and make fun of her inability to fly by calling her awful names such as chicken and flightless pigeon. Even though she held a calm expression on the outside, she tried her best to keep the anger that was building up inside of her bottled up. She knew fighting wasn't the right thing to do. It would only make things worse. So she decided to tell a teacher. The day she told the teacher about the bullying was the same day a horrible tragedy would occur. One that she would never forget and would leave her traumatized forever. It was time to go home when she had told her teacher about the pony who was making her life a living hell. She waited until all of the ponies in her class left, until it was just her and the teacher. She told the teacher everything about how this cult was calling her names, taunting her, spitting on her, etc. The teacher was absolutely shocked when he heard this, and told her that he would have a serious talk with the cult first thing Monday morning when he walked into class. She knew it wouldn't really help much, but it felt good to let some pony know what she was going through. With one last smile, she left the classroom and made her way out of the school, ready to enjoy her weekend. She felt good. Her wings buzzed as she rode down the street on her scooter, but then her smile faded as she heard screaming. Horrified screaming. She stopped and listened. She heard cries of a pony saying, "Help! There's been a murder!" She felt her heart skip a beat. Had she heard the pony correctly? "Murder! Murder!" the pony yelled again. It sounded close. It was right around the corner. Her heart pounding, she slowly pushed her scooter to where the cries were coming from. She turned to see a crowd of ponies looking down in horror and shock at whoever had their life stolen from them. She made her way over to the crowd and gently shoved some ponies out of the way so she could see who they were looking at. When she saw who the victim was, her heart felt like it shattered into a million pieces. It was her mother. She lay on the ground, her throat slit, leaving a coat of crimson blood lying around her in a puddle. Her eyes were wide open and glazed over. Her face was twisted into a look of utter terror. The teenager felt her legs start to tremble. She took a few more steps toward her mother's lifeless corpse. No, she muttered. This wasn't happening. This had to be a nightmare. It had to be. She closed her eyes and opened them again. The body was still there. It was not a dream, nor a nightmare. It was an actual murder. "Mom!" She charged over to her mother, ignoring the cries of ponies telling her to stay back. She picked up her mother's head and hugged it tightly, tears flowing like a fountain down her cheeks as she sobbed loudly. She didn't care if she was getting blood on her hooves. The police were there, and they wouldn't charge her with murder. Red was smeared onto her hooves as she was pulled off the body. It was a police pony. "Let me go! Let me go! That's my mom!" she screamed, her hooves flailing rapidly. "She's dead!" the police pony exclaimed, gripping her tightly. "I'm sorry!" The sound of sirens nearly matched the volume of her screaming and wailing throughout the air as two paramedic ponies covered her mother's body with a white sheet and lifted her onto a stretcher and was put inside an ambulance as it took her away, leaving her distraught daughter behind in a pool of tears. 1 week had passed since that horrifying and traumatizing experience. At her mother's funeral, she couldn't contain her tears. Her best friend was gone forever. She hoped to imagine it was just a nightmare whenever she woke up, but it was always reality. She didn't go to school for an entire week since the murder. She was afraid to face her bully and was afraid she was going to cry like a baby in front of her classmates. Even though her stepfather was as depressed as she was, he told her that she had to stop skipping school because she was missing out on homework and quizzes. As much as she wanted to protest against it, she knew it would only just make things useless. So what choice did she have? And so, here she was on a cold, rainy Monday morning, sitting in her classroom, staring down at her desk. She was relieved when she found out that her bully had been moved to a different seat. But that still wasn't enough to make her happy. Ever since her mother's death, her teachers, classmates, and other ponies in the school noticed her change in attitude when she entered the building. Usually, she was always energetic and outgoing, always talking and being athletic. But now, she was more quiet, not looking at any pony. Whenever she walked down the hallway, her head would always be sulked down, looking at the ground, and her pacing was very slow, almost like a turtle. To some ponies, they were sorry and worried for her, but for the colt who bullied her, it was a bullseye for his anger ever since he had found out she had told the teacher on him and got in trouble for it. At lunchtime, it would be a perfect time to confront her, to vent at her, but he should have regretted that decision because later on that day in the cafeteria, he would do something that would make her snap. The sounds of multiple voices echoed throughout the entire cafeteria as ponies ate and chatted with their friends. The Pegasus sat alone at a table, slowly chewing her sandwich without even turning her head when there was a loud crash as some pony tripped and dropped their tray, spilling the food contents everywhere as laughter filled the room. "Hey, chicken!" a voice called. She didn't even have to turn her head to whoever was yelling to her. She knew it was the bully, and he was standing right next to her. She could feel his rage-filled stare burning into her. "Did you tell on me?" His voice was filled with anger, but to his surprise and his frustration, she didn't even turn her head to face him, as if she didn't notice he was there. This infuriated the colt even more. "Hey, I am talking to you! Are you deaf or something? I asked you a question!" Again, she didn't even bother looking up at him. The colt grabbed the sandwich out of her hooves, slammed it on the table, and smashed it with his hoof. This got her attention. She looked up at him, her face mixed with a neutral, yet slightly agitated expression. The bully sneered at her. "Oh, so now you're finally gonna stop being a wuss and pay attention to me?" He then gave a malicious laugh. "You are such a worthless snitch. Telling a teacher on me is like telling your mommy that you've gotten a scrape on your knee." The Pegasi's eyes went wide and her pupils contracted. This made the bully's malicious grin grow wider. "But, oh wait, isn't your mommy dead?" He laughed again, not noticing the Pegasus beginning to shake and grit her teeth. He stopped laughing and noticed her change in expression. "Aw, is the little baby getting angry?" he said, baby talking her. "Your mommy's not gonna do anything about it because she's dead." Suddenly, He felt a hoof slam into his nose, and he fell back onto the floor. He covered his muzzle with both of his hooves and let the agonizing cries echo throughout the room. The entire cafeteria went silent. He looked at his hooves and gasped as the sight of blood covering them was present. He then looked up and felt a huge chill run down his spine. It was the Pegasus he had just been picking on, her face contorted in a look of pure rage and bloodlust as she violently shook. She grasped a fork in her hoof, glaring daggers at the petrified bully that lay on the floor. Then she lowered herself and pressed one hoof on his neck, cutting off his windpipe, and the other one with the fork to his throat, the points of the fork pressing against his neck. Then she pressed her face up against his. "Now you listen here and listen good," she spat with malice in her voice. "You can call me names. You can make a fuckery of me. But don't you ever, and I mean ever, talk negative about my mother. Do you understand?" The colt only whimpered as a response, angering the Pegasus even more. She pressed down on his neck with the fork, causing the colt to let out a shrill cry of pain. "I said, do you understand me?" The Pegasus roared so loud as if all of Equestria could hear. The colt had tears coming out of his eyes as he choked out a response. Yes, please, don't hurt me." The Pegasus snorted, her hot breath coming out of her nostrils like a bull seeing red, and that's what she saw. Nothing but red. That was the color she wanted to see on her tormentor. Then she said something that made every pony in the room's heart skip a beat. "Oh, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to kill you." Some of the ponies gasped as she rose the fork in the air, ready for what was to come. But before she had a chance to bring it down, a hoof grabbed her hoof and pulled her up, causing her to drop the fork. It landed on the floor with a clink. "Hey, break it up!" her teacher said, pulling her off of the colt and turning her to face him. Her eyes were still wide as she twitched uncontrollably, making the teacher feel uncomfortable himself. He shook her hard, trying to break her free from her angry and insanity-filled trance. "Snap out of it!" he cried, his voice cracking. He slapped her across the face. He didn't mean to, but he didn't have a choice. He was utterly afraid of the Pegasus' wrath. After she had been slapped, the Pegasus held a hoof to her face, her rage gone from her features. She blinked a few times before looking down at the bloody heap she had just caused. A few ponies and teachers were checking to see if he was alright. Realizing what she had just done, she instantly bolted out of the cafeteria, ignoring the cries of her name from her teacher. She bolted to her locker, pulled out her saddlebag, then ran outside and got on her scooter and sped away all the way back to her home. Once she got back, she was soaked from the heavy downpour outside as she ran into her bedroom and buried herself into her pillows and let mixed emotions of fear, anger, guilt, and sadness pour through her tears. She had never been so violent in her life. She had anger issues, but she never expected herself to explode like that, especially in front of a lot of ponies in school. She also didn't expect herself to go as far and try to attack the pony with a fork. If the teacher weren't there in time to stop her from causing an even bloodier scene, the pony probably would have been dead by now. She cried until she fell asleep. Hours later, she awoke to the sound of the door closing and a pony that sounded like her stepfather sighing. She rubbed her dry, tear-stained eyes and looked at her clock. It was 3:45 in the afternoon. Weird, she thought to herself. I thought he didn't get off until 5 o'clock. She got up and stretched her hooves, then went to see who had entered the kitchen. As expected, her stepfather was sitting in a chair at the dining table, but she saw that he had a look of gloom on his face. Confused and a bit worried, she trotted over to her stepfather and sat down next to him. "Oh, hi," he said glumly without even glancing at her. Something was definitely wrong. Her stepfather was usually in a good mood whenever he came back from work. "Dad, what's wrong?" she asked, studying his expression. I got fired," he told her. "My boss just randomly came up to me in my office and told me that my services were no longer required." He let out a sad sigh. "Now without a job, I don't know how I'm going to put food on the table. If only your mother were here, she'd know what to do." The teenager looked down at the table. She felt a small tear stream down her cheek, but wiped it away with her hoof. "Well, how was school today?" he asked her. What kind of a question was that? How could he expect her to have a good day at school following the tragedy? She didn't want to tell him that she went berserk and nearly murdered some pony in the cafeteria, so she just shrugged slowly and said, "Same as usual, I guess." She tried to mask her deceiving tone. Her stepfather didn't notice since he was too upset. Minutes passed before her stepfather told her that he was going out to get a drink to try and ease off the stress. Then he left, leaving her all alone again. When he came home that night, she instantly smelled the putrid scent of alcohol on his hide and from his breath. She could tell he was drunk. Very drunk. When she tried to help him sit down on the couch, he got angry, and to her shock, he smacked her across the face. He had never done that to her. She knew he was drunk, but he wouldn't go that far by hitting her. But she just shook it off, thinking it was just the alcohol levels in his blood rising. But she thought wrong. Ever since that night, he would go out every day to the bar and come back drunk, and would be even more cruel than her school bully. Sometimes he would go out to the grocery store and buy a pack or two of beer. Whenever she did something by accident, he would slap her or whip her with a belt. Sometimes he would go into her room and for no reason would cruelly taunt her. One time, he told her that her mother was a better mare than she was and finished it off by calling her a whore. Even though she showed utter hurt and sorrow, she also had more emotions she kept inside of her. Malice, anger, animosity, bloodlust. She wanted to see her stepfather's blood. She wanted him dead. Even though she had been feeling these strong emotions toward him, she knew if she killed him, she would act just like him and would be behind bars. So she tried her best not to snap and attack him. The abuse had been getting worse until 2 years later, when it was just weeks after she had turned 17. The abuse would get so bad, she would do the unthinkable to her stepfather, in which it would turn out bloody and deadly. "2 years. That's how long it's been since her mother was killed, and the murder still wasn't solved." The thought of it made the teenager, now age 17, let out more sorrowful tears as she lay on her bed, bawling hysterically. She didn't care if her throat was hurting from crying. She didn't care if she was covering her entire pillow with tears. She just wanted to make the abuse stop. She wanted to grab her mother and hug her tightly while she consoled her, telling her everything would be all right. She sat up and wiped her red, tear-stained eyes and sniffled as she looked over towards a picture on her desk. It was a picture of her mother and her real father and her when she was 9. She got out of bed and walked over to it and picked it up. She gave a slight, sad smile as a tear fell from her face and splattered on the frame. "I miss you, Mom and Dad," she said, her voice choking through her sobs. She placed the picture back on her desk and turned to look at another one, and she felt her face grow red hot. On the picture was her stepfather and mother's wedding day. They were kissing. The sight of that made her blood boil rapidly.
How could she marry such an abusive and disgusting pony like him?
She thought negatively.
If Mom were still alive today, his sorry ass would have been gone by now.
With a burst of rage, she swiftly picked up the picture, and with a cry of fury, she heaved it on the ground. The glass shattered a little, but not too much. Then, she lifted her hoof, and with a swift motion, she stomped on it hard. "Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you!" She screamed with each stomp until the glass was completely shattered. Her chest was heaving hard with each breath she took to try and calm herself down. But it didn't work. She was in such a state of rage, she couldn't think clearly. She turned her head to the door, and she instantly knew what she had to do. "You abuse me, I strike back," she said, her voice a menacing whisper. "You caused me so much pain for these 2 awful years, and now you're gonna know what it feels like to hurt some pony back." With that, she walked over to her door and turned the knob slowly so her stepfather wouldn't hear. Then she made her way into the hallway and towards the stairs. When she got close to the stairs, she heard the sound of water boiling in a pot. She got a smell of it, and her mouth watered. It was tomato soup, her favorite. Just the thought of her stepfather banning her tonight from having dinner made her anger flare back up in her. She was starving for Celestia's sake, and him not feeding her anything was so unfair. Taking a few more steps down the stairs until she got to the last step, she peeked around the corner to the kitchen. There he was, her stepfather, mixing the soup in the pot while music played from a radio. It was a song she didn't recognize, but whatever it was, it sounded awful. Right next to him, she spotted a knife sitting on the counter. Tomato pulp was sticking on the silver blade. Just as she was about to take another step, the phone rang. "Oh, for the love of Celestia!" her stepfather complained, annoyed. Who the hell could be calling at this time? Perfect, she thought. He was distracted. Quietly, ever so slowly, she creeped into the kitchen. Her stepfather's back was turned as he talked on the phone. He didn't even notice her sneak past him. He didn't even notice her pick up the pulp-covered knife. She hid behind a spot at the table where she could see him, but he couldn't. She heard the phone slam as her stepfather's hoofsteps stomped on the hard floor. Damn telemarketers, she heard him mutter as he entered the kitchen and went to the pot to continue stirring the soup. He didn't even notice the knife was gone. This was her opportunity. Slowly, she stood up and quietly edged toward him, a cold stare plastered on her face. She stopped as she stared at a glass cup on the counter. Then she got an idea in her head. It would be the perfect thing to catch his attention. She put her knife-wielding hoof behind her back while she stuck out her other hoof and briskly swiped the glass off the counter. It made a loud shattering sound as it hit the floor, causing thousands of sharp, clear glass to scatter everywhere. Her stepfather quickly turned around to see what the sound was. When he saw what had happened and who caused it, he was furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he screamed at her. "Look at what you did, you clumsy twit! That's the second dish you've broken!" She didn't even flinch at his booming insults. She just kept her cold glare on him as she gripped the knife she held behind her back tighter as her stepfather, or in this case, step-monster, continued to berate her with insults. "You are such a dumb pony! I wish you'd get a job so you'd be off my mane most of the day! Why did I even marry your mother?" He stopped as he noticed her hoof was behind her back. "What do you have behind your back?" he asked, his voice lowering. She didn't answer. She kept glaring daggers at him. "What do you have behind your back?" her stepfather repeated, his voice becoming louder again. Again, she didn't reply. Her stepfather was fuming now. "If you don't tell me what you're hiding by the count of 3, I'll just have to force myself to see." He then began counting. 1. She didn't move. 2, he continued. She still didn't budge. 3, he finished as he stomped menacingly toward her. "I've warned you," he exclaimed, raising his hoof to strike. "Show me what you got behind your back." His angry words were silenced as he felt a tremendous pain in his chest. He looked down and saw that she was holding a knife, and she had thrusted it right in the middle of his chest. Blood was starting to seep out of his hide, starting to cover the blade with a vermilion liquid. He then looked at his stepdaughter, and even though the blade was penetrated into him, he felt the feeling of horror fill him as he saw her eyes glisten with bloodlust. A look so terrifying, it could kill a pony just by staring at them. She then lifted the knife up his neck, causing him to gurgle and gag as blood poured out of his mouth. It felt like fire burning him as the blade thrusted up his throat. He knew he wasn't going to make it out alive. He knew he was going to die, and it would be by his stepdaughter. And in his final moments, he wanted to apologize for all the abuse and torture he gave her, all the physical pain he made her suffer through. But it was too late. With the force of speed, she yanked the knife out of his neck as blood poured out from the gaping incision like a fountain. And with one last gasp for air, his eyes rolled into the back of his head, and his body fell limp on the floor. As she stared at his bloody and lifeless corpse, she realized what she had done and began to panic. She had just murdered some pony, and now she was imagining her possible experience behind bars, laying on a hard, thin bed of wood. How she'd be forced to walk in shackles with criminals she didn't even know. How she'd have to be forced to eat revolting prison food. She shook in utter terror, sweat pouring down her face. "What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do?" she asked herself aloud. Her panicked thoughts were brought to a halt when she heard her stomach growl. "Okay," she told herself in her mind. "I'll take one taste of the soup. Then I'll dispose of the body and clean up the blood myself." Stepping over to the pot, bloody knife still in hoof, she leaned over the pot and sniffed it. It didn't smell much like the tomato soup she knew and loved. She took the wooden spoon out of the pot and tasted it, and immediately spat it out. It was awful. That wasn't the taste she remembered. Her stepfather wasn't really that great of a cook, but he did make some decent tasting things for her when he was his formerly nice self. But this was the work of an alcoholic. She wanted to add something to the soup to try to give it a more delectable taste. Then she realized she was still holding the crimson-coated blade in her hoof. She looked at it, examining the red liquid from her deceased victim. There was something about it that looked good, edible. So, without much hesitation, she stuck her tongue on the knife and licked the blood. She smacked her lips a few times before her face froze with surprise. Then after a few seconds, she took another lick.
Wow,
she thought.
This actually tastes good.
Still, she had to dispose of the body. She looked at the corpse, then the pot, then the knife, and an idea flashed in her head. She had never had a better dinner. It was the best tomato soup she had ever tasted. It was a few minutes after she had slain her stepfather. While she waited for the soup to cook, she took her time by mopping up the blood on the floor, cleaning herself, and disposing the body. The way she got rid of her stepfather's body, well, she had bitten off more than she could chew. Wiping her face with a napkin, she got up and looked around the kitchen. It was totally spotless, as if nothing had ever happened. Then, she decided that she wanted to move out of the apartment so she could go back to Ponyville and see her friends again. But then, she realized she was broke. But she remembered her stepfather's words a couple of minutes ago before she had killed him.
I wish you'd get a job so you'd be out of my maid most of the day.
That's it. She knew how she would make some money. By getting a job. But where? While she thought of where to apply, she brushed her teeth, combed her mane, and went to bed. As she tucked herself in, she finally knew where she wanted to go. The perfect place to earn some hard-earned money. The grocery store. She smiled at the idea.
I'll go first thing in the morning,
she told herself as she pulled the covers over her face and fell asleep into a world of peaceful dreams.
Well, hello there, my horror crew. I hope you enjoyed today's narration. If you did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications, and click that bell. As you see right next to me are my social media links. They will be down in the description below if you want to check them out. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed today's video, and I will see you in the next one. Have a scary day, my horror crew.